This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter, batch churned from single origin cream.
We've got a culturing process, a fermenting process, an aging process. So the butter will taste very different than, I guess, the average supermarket butter. I like to say we make butter makers butter. Like, this is the sort of butter makers would like to eat, simply because of the slow process in which we ferment and age and get the flavour into it. You know, the natural fermentation that gets all the flavours into the cream, and then once you churn it, you end up with this really rich, flavoursome butter that evolves and changes because it's a live culture that's in the butter as well.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
You'd want to step back and just see people enjoying themselves. People laughing, people just sharing a moment with their friends or loved ones or whatever it is. But for me, that's probably the biggest thing, is people having a great time and just an experience. And they go, oh, this is great. And it sort of feels like you're travelling in France, but just in your local area.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. The last 2 years have had their challenges, but as we're opening up and getting back on track, we're seeing a throng of new openings, diving deeper into real experiences inspired by the great things of yesteryear and full of promise of what's to come. Sebastian Lutaud is the culinary director of Etimon Projects, owners of LouLou Bistro. Sebastian, how are you?
Good, yourself?
Good. Well, what's it like opening a restaurant in the environment that we find ourselves in?
Oh, opening a restaurant is already difficult. And I think, during these times it's about 6 times more difficult, I'd say. It just takes a lot longer, and, obviously everybody knows about the staffing issues that we're all having. It's, nothing's easy, to be honest. And even from a build perspective, materials or just the supply chain of anything is difficult. So it's been enjoyable times.
Well, tell us a little bit about the project. It's in Lavender Bay. What made you choose that site and create the bistro there?
So, look, it all started, we had a couple of sites spaces, areas to sort of look at. And when we first looked, there was 2 spaces that we looked at. One we thought could work for a restaurant, and the other space we thought, we could do something interesting here from a retail perspective, because it was more front-facing to the road. So as we were sort of looking at the area and looking of, what concept do we want it to do, obviously an all-day sort of dining was quite clear of what we wanted to do for the area. And then I think the other side, the retail space, we thought, we wanted to do a bakery, I think, at the start. And then that's how sort of the project came alive. We started looking at, what kind of food we wanted to do. And I thought, obviously being French, and we were quite passionate about French food. We thought a French bistro would be great, doing an all day. And then next door, we wanted to do a boulangerie. But in my mind, I grew up in France, and, you finish school and you could still go home and get a fresh baguette, where in Australia, there's, you finish work, there's nowhere to get a fresh piece of bread. So I wanted to do a boulangerie that was still open when it was 7 p.m. and people could still come and get a fresh baguette. So to be able to do that as well, that's where I've sort of thought of, let's do a traiteur and a boulangerie together. So that retail space, you walk in, there's a bakery element, there's also the traiteur element. At least you can still come at 7 p.m. and get a roast chicken and grab a slice of parfait and still get a fresh baguette. Or in the mornings, you could still come down and get a coffee and a croissant. And so that way, just it felt it was used the whole way through, if that makes sense.
In the 90s and early 2000s, French bistros were all over Sydney and a real part of the culinary landscape. And then modern Asian and influenced and really came to the fore. And we kind of lost a lot of the French bistros. But there's been a renaissance. What do you think's driven that sort of focus on French food again?
Look, I don't know. Look, I think at the last 5 years it's been Italian. So I think it feels like it's going back to sort of basic, humble flavoursome food. So an Italian's very, it's very produce driven. It's fresh. It can be fresh, and pastas. I think we've lost that carbonara style. It was a cream. It's coming to what's the Italians how they do it. And I think French is just becoming that basics of French cooking. It was that French technicals. So I feel like it's coming back. Yes, agree.
I want to explore all of that shortly, but you mentioned you grew up in France. Take us back there to when you were young. What was food like, and what role did it play in your family?
So I grew up in a little town called Saint-Chamond, so it's probably about 50 k's off Lyon. And look, my dad's a pastry chef. I sort of grew up in a little patisserie store. So my youth was sort of watching my dad baking cakes and me eating them and licking the side of the bowls. And also, like I still remember is, I used to serve, I was quite a young boy, and I'd be serving the customers. Customers would come to me and say, hey, can you grab me a croissant? And I'd look for the crispy edges, and I'd look for exactly what I would eat. So, food's always been part of my childhood, if that makes sense, and especially from that patisserie style. Next door was a boulangerie as well, so I've always been around it. Christmas, if I do spend Christmas with the family, my brother's a sommelier, so you can imagine the Christmas dinners. They're a little bit crazy. But yeah, look, it's always been part of my childhood, how I grew up.
I can't let you go. That sounds like a pretty wild and interesting Christmas. Can you tell us about a feast and what sort of experience your families have at Christmas?
Oh, so I was back in France, was it 2 years ago, just before the COVID started. And, basically it's my mum trying to want to cook dinner for all of us, but she ended up getting pushed out. It's me sort of taking over, or my dad, or even my brother wants to get involved, and it goes on for hours, and we just sit around the table cooking. We wouldn't do big dinners. We'll probably do little testers of things, because we'll be sitting around and drinking all different types of wines, and that's pretty much like that goes on for about 4 or 5 hours for Christmas Eve. We celebrate Christmas Eve more in France than we do for lunches, but yeah, that would be Christmas at our family.
You've got a particularly strong Australian accent for a Frenchman. What lured you to Australia? When did you come over?
So I came here. So my dad, obviously being a patissier, he was sort of spoken to and looked to come and do a little patisserie here in Sydney when I was 8 years old in 1989, if I remember correctly. And yeah, look, but that was the first couple of years. He opened a chocolate shop in Double Bay, and look, it did do really well. I think at the time, nobody I don't know. I thought it was probably too early in the time, like great little chocolates and stuff like that. It's just Australia. I don't think Australia was ready for it. So we did that for a couple of years, and then we weren't too sure what to do, if we were to go back to France or not. But then my dad obviously started working in hotels and being sort of a head pastry chef in a few hotels in Sydney, like the Hyatt in King's Cross. Then he went to the Park Lane when Dietmar and Liam Tomlin were there, and sort of that's how sort of me getting involved in cooking sort of started as well, because I did work experience. My dad sort of sent me to Liam to do a bit of work experience, so that's how I sort of started as well. So that was our start to Australia.
Take us back to that first experience in an actual commercial kitchen with Liam Tomlin. Well, do you have any stories of what that was like?
Oh, yeah. I think quite full on. I think so I started, it was at Cassis, it was for 2 weeks, and it was actually happening the same time that Liam was moving to Bank. So I started off, I did a couple of days of Liam, and then there was the new head chefs coming on board, and it was a little bit, it was a disaster, to be honest. Not in a bad way, but it's just, starting me as an apprentice, or not even an apprentice, just getting involved in the kitchen and just seeing the change of staff, because some staff were working at Cassis and Liam was taking them all to Bank, and there was the new staff coming down, and it was just a bit, it was quite full on. But, my dad being who he is, just said, keep your head down.
You've spent some time at some pretty incredible restaurants, Tetsuyu's, the Ledbury. What sort of impact did they have on you?
Look, it's funny, you look back and each different chefs will have different impact on you. If I look at Tetsuyu's, I think that, the flavors, the way he balances flavors, and the way he is with just keeping things so simple and so flavorsome. You learn great things from him. Brett, you obviously would learn, I've never seen anyone work so hard and so determined. So you learn that kind of stuff. I've also worked, there's a chef called Olivier Zer. I've never worked with a French chef who has the knowledge of, he was like an encyclopedia. He knew everything. He knew all the classic sauces. Just working along these people, you just pick up different things, if that makes sense. So everyone will have different influences, I'd say, for me.
Is there a period of time that really set you on the trajectory to find your own voice as a chef that you can share? Yeah,
look, I suppose in France, when I was at the Pyramid, worked alongside Olivier Elzer, who's currently in Hong Kong. He's got a 2-star. I don't know, at the start he was very dominant, but he taught you how to grow individually, how to make decisions. I think that's the most important thing in the kitchen, is learning and knowing when it's time to make the right decision. And that's when you sort of start to look into a management role, if that makes sense. I'm able to manage a team. I'm able to, coming back in France, the structures in kitchens are quite strict. You'd start as a demi and you go as a chef de partie, or, sometimes you even start as a commis, but you move up the rank really slowly. And I feel like, Olivia was that kind of person to sort of bring me up as a sous chef and giving me freedom and letting me expose myself as a chef and as a manager. So probably that would probably be the biggest one for me.
One of the interesting things about your career is that sort of the smaller scale restaurant that you were part of, and then that move to looking after sort of big brigade in big groups. What was the difference, and how different is that shift to deal with as a chef and manager?
Look, for me, for me it's numbers and structure. So once if you've got a structure in place for 100 covers or 200 covers, it sort of becomes, you just need more staff. I don't know, I see maths and I see structure working very well together for the volume and non-volume, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So that's the way I would look at it. So obviously, I did Newport, and the volume and the numbers there, outside you could do 2,000 people walk through in a day.
Wow.
It was chaotic. It was good fun.
Give us some examples from a food perspective. How do you maintain the standard and the integrity of the product when you're doing such volume?
Some serious training and making sure you got the right equipment. I always say the right tools to go. So you got to give the staff the right tools to be able to succeed. So making sure that you've got the right equipment, everything's got to be right. Obviously, you're going to be able to train the people right and just give them everything they need to be able to succeed. You can't ask people to do something without the right tools.
Tell us a bit about your cooking at the moment. LouLou's is leaning on your French history and your background. Tell us a bit about your cooking and sort of what typifies it.
Look, it's funny when me and Billy were talking. He's the head chef. We were talking about the menu. I've always wanted to do French food, but it just needs to be lighter. And I think Sydney has influenced me to cook that way. Is we don't eat, a fish that's got full reduced cream and you walk out, you're just stuffed. I think LouLou, the influence of LouLou is just it's French. We want it to be technical, but simple on the plate. And we don't want it to be heavy. We don't want you to walk out and, feel like you can't, you're stuffed. So we're very, Billy and I have just been really clear on the menu. Just let's keep things light, simple and fresh, and, lots of technique into it. But yeah, I think, I hate to call it like this, but, it's just like the Sydney has influenced that French cooking for me that way, of just keeping things a lot lighter and fresh.
Are there challenges in making French cuisine lighter? And do you have an example of a dish or two where you've managed to do that?
Well, for example, here we were doing a John Dory farci with like a scallop mousse and wrapped with spinach, but we're just doing a champagne velouté. But it's, we're not reducing the velouté too far. It's just light with a little drop at the end to just freshen it back up, and just it's not, you don't expect it to stick to the plate, if that makes sense.
Mm. You mentioned the influence of your father. Is there any sort of lessons that he's taught you about the trade?
Yeah, in pastry, 100%. Everything, to be honest. Look, I still talk to him now. He still sends me his recipes, or he still sends me things, to be honest. So, yes.
Do you have any stories or examples that speak of that?
Oh, at the moment, I'm trying to think now, at the moment. I don't want to give him credit for anything, do I? Look, at the moment, we haven't put anything from him, but look, I think it's more from a technique point of view, or just how to do it in a way, I think, if that makes sense. Because at the moment here, we're just working with, I don't know how to explain this, but, he guides me in a sort of way, or goes, here's some ideas, and then I'll work my way through it, if that makes sense.
French cuisine has influenced many other cuisines across the globe. What do you love about French cuisine? Are there any dishes that are really important to you?
What I love about French cuisine is, I think that, there's a few cuisines who do it, but just respecting the product. You can have an amazing roast chicken just done so simply, and just a great seasoning, and that's enough. And I think, probably what the French do best, rather than any other culinary, is sauces. Like, for me, sauces is the flavour of, that's what makes the dish. So a great jus, or a great velouté, or just a great vinaigrette, or anything like that will be the thing that really makes French food for me stands out. There's
been an inability to travel overseas for all of us over the last couple of years. What sort of impact has the last couple of years had on you, given your roots in France and that inability to travel as well? Yeah, look, I was traveling just when COVID hit. I left France just probably 2 months before, or even a month before. So I did Christmas. I think COVID hit that February, so I was in France probably a month before COVID started. So I was lucky enough just to see my parents that Christmas before. And now how it's just impacted us is, we've just been FaceTiming lots. I've got 2 children where, my parents say, oh, we need to see them every week. So, it's just lots of FaceTime, trying to keep it that way, to be honest. Has this period of time had an impact on you professionally in the way that you see your role in hospitality?
Yeah, I think, everyone needs to think completely different from look, the way we built LouLou as well, we were building a business during COVID. So, the retail space was really one of those things that we had to make sure that in case we go through another lockdown, that business could still be able to support the community, if that makes sense. So 100% it's affected how we think and how we're going to build businesses for the next couple of years, I'd say.
You mentioned some of the lessons that you've learned in the past is about how to manage kitchens and manage people. What's some of the techniques and things that you do to create a safe workplace and one that creates career paths for people?
Look, for me, I'm a strong believer. For example, being the culinary director is I don't want me to tell the chef this is the menu. I want to work with them and want them to feel like they've fully owned the menu, if that makes sense. Nothing worse than having someone go, here's my recipe, go do it. As you walk away 6 months later, it's going to be a complete different recipe. So you want to give full ownership to the chef, and I want them to grow. I want them to take responsibility. I want them to feel like it's their place as well, just as much as mine, if that makes sense. So for me, that's probably, I want people to flourish. I want them to feel like they've got the rights to do what they want to do. Obviously with guidelines and a bit of mentoring, that works really well. But I just feel like whenever you've gone in and said, this is how I want things done, blah, blah, it just never becomes that. People don't feel like they've owned it.
You've got family history in the hospitality industry with your father, and also your brother, a sommelier as well. What do you love about what you do?
Look, to be honest, I think the people piece, being around the people who have the same passion, I think that would be the first one. And the second one for me is just enjoyment of, seeing people enjoying the food that you've done or the experience you've given them. I think those would be my two biggest ones. Obviously, I love food and, obviously wine and stuff like that. Obviously, that's probably the third one. Who doesn't? But I think, those two first ones would be probably the biggest ones. Hence why I'm still, a chef, after 25 years, I'd say.
You've opened LouLou at a time where everything is opening up and there's a lot more optimism. What do you hope to see and have in 2022?
Oh, a bit more certainty of what's going on in the world. I think, COVID will always bring a few curveballs, especially, at the moment we've had, chefs who they're out getting tested because they're feeling sick or unwell. So that's just not helpful at the moment. So a bit more certainty in the next 6 months would be a bit better, a bit nicer. Then we can plan better.
When you've got the dining room full there on Lavender Bay, what's it going to feel like? What are you hoping for from LouLou?
Look, I'm hoping for you'd want to step back and just see people enjoying themselves, people laughing, people just sharing a moment with their friends or loved ones or whatever it is. But for me, that's probably the biggest thing, is people having a great time and just an experience. And they go, oh, this is great, and sort of feels like you're traveling in France, but just in your local area.
Well, it sounds amazing, and we all look forward to traveling in France again soon. Sebastian, we've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds today to hear just a part of your story. Please keep in touch. Good luck, and we'll catch up again soon. Thank you very much. You have a good day. This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.